So hi to everyone who has attended today at the Dynamic State event, and a big shout out to Andy and Matt for allowing me to say a few words. These certainly are extraordinary times that we find ourselves in, and something that I take great comfort from is a story by a guy named John Stockdale. And John Stockdale was a vice admiral in the US Navy during the Vietnam War, and in fact he was a prisoner of war for 7 years there, and really faced some atrocious conditions, as bad as it can get. And when he was released, he was asked about why he made it through compared to so many of the other soldiers that didn't. And he said that in his experience, the ones that were sort of pessimistic about their scenario, they very quickly perished. Even the ones that were optimistic about their scenario, who believed that they would get through or get released at Christmas, Christmas would come and go, and then their spirits would be crushed and they'd very quickly perish afterwards. He said what worked for him was being really honest about where he was at, facing the grim realities in all their ugliness, but at the same time developing this sense that he would get through, this muscular optimism. And he held those two things together at the same time, and that's come to be known as the Stockdale paradox. And I think it's really appropriate for where we're at ecologically right now. We have to be honest about the ugliness of our situation and let ourselves feel the depths of where we are, but also really look for those small glimmers or those ways through. And they're certainly out there. And I spend a lot of my time looking at that more muscular hope side. And there are so many things that give me hope. As Jane alluded to in her speech earlier today, it is the eloquence of the younger generation that are coming through, the way they talk about this topic, the questions that they're asking, the systemic questions. They're not just focusing on carbon emissions. They really don't talk about emissions without talking about First Nations justice or other areas that we need to improve. So once they actually get some power, it's going to be extraordinary, because the ones that I've met have already started developing really functioning networks right across the world with each other. They're learning governance skills at the same time as tackling the climate crisis, which really does put us in good stead. I'm buoyed by the momentum in the farming sector, the regenerative agriculture space. Out of the 40,000 farmers that we have in Australia now, just under 9,000 are doing some form of organic, regenerative or biological farming. That's almost a quarter of our farmers, which is just extraordinary. And that momentum isn't going up anywhere. It's increasing, if anything. What gives me hope is the Indigenous wisdom that we have in this country that is finally starting to be listened to. We have at least 60,000 years of acute observational science at our disposal that would be just crazy not to implement into our Western thinking, and thankfully that's starting to happen. I'm buoyed by, I've just done a film tour of 62 screenings around the country, and the quality of ideas and submitted solutions that have been submitted for funding that came with the film is just extraordinary, and speaks to the holistic regenerative way that people are starting to think, not just about profits, but how it can benefit their community and tread lightly ecologically. And I'm really buoyed by the amount of creativity, ingenuity, finance that is going into these ecological concerns right now. It's just extraordinary right around the world. And days like you've just had today are really happening in boardrooms, at government levels. Some of the best and most creative minds in the world are really putting their energy and efforts into ways that we can regenerate and turn around the mess that we're in. But most of all, what gives me hope is the non-linearity of change, whether that's a technology, an invention, like the printing press that no one saw coming, that suddenly decentralized information and led to the Enlightenment and all sorts of developments that we have now. Even the motor car. No one could have foreseen that one invention would lead to complete city redesign and all sorts of industries off the back of that. So who knows what lies ahead in terms of technology, but also the way that which we can create change socially. That's never been linear. There's always been a build-up of momentum, like the human rights movement, like Rosa Parks on the bus, and then something happened that just triggers an absolute wave of change. And we've seen that countless times. I think of the suffragettes who really were ridiculed. I think of 1905, even the US president saying that no sensible woman should want to vote. And just 2 years later, 3,000 women took to the streets. And then 15 years later, those women were granted the right to vote. And the same with even the same-sex marriage in the US. That was codified into law, that it couldn't happen, signed by Bill Clinton in 1996. And then 19 years later, that was completely overturned. So we just don't know. There isn't a linear approach to what can happen with our future. We've just got to keep doing what we're all doing, coming together, collaborating, reconnecting to find that pathway forward. And I like to think that historians, maybe in a few hundred years from now, will look back to this time as an extraordinary moment for our species, that here we all are on the cusp of a complete energy transition, a transportation transition, an agricultural transition, and probably a resource transition as well. And we get to be alive and be a part of that right now. That those historians will look back and see that amidst all the chaos and the extinctions and the nihilism and all the misinformation, there were small groups of people that chose a different path and started to really plant the seeds of a thriving, regenerative future. So that's all of you in that room today. That's me, all of us. This is how we're going to get through this. We can't rely on one person to do it. It's going to take community. So all the best. I look forward to hearing what unfolds from your gathering today. And once again, thanks for having me be a part of it. Cheers.